believe that a brave new church, as we move forward into the future, as we move forward into a new generation, into a new era, will be a church that cares about creation. And so this morning I want to read you the first chapter of the Bible. All right, well, maybe not the whole chapter. I edited it down. I redacted it a little bit. But I want you to hear and feel the very opening words of our scriptures and what they say. And so let's just take a minute and let me read through this. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And there was evening and morning the first day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let the dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years." And it was so. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them. "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. Then God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all of the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." And God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." And then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it, they will be yours for food." And it was so. And all the vegetarians said, "Amen." All right, that's all right. And God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. What an incredibly beautiful text. And I'd encourage you to take some time this week to sit with Genesis 1 and 2 and let these powerful words ruminate in your soul. Now, some of you may want to focus on the modern questions about, was this a literal 24-hour days? How long ago did this happen? How does this jive with the Big Bang Theory and evolutionary theory? And those are wonderful questions, fine questions, but they're not the kinds of questions that this writer was actually trying to answer. And so they're not really the questions that we're going to explore today. Now, I will tell you that faithful Christians see the answers to those questions really, really differently. Instead, I want you to focus your attention on the rhythm and the patterns of this poetry. Focus on the tone of the story and the use of the word good. With our remaining time today, I want to explore 2 reasons why a brave new church will care about creation and care for creation. And the first reason is just this, that to care for creation is to love God. To care for creation is to love God. So when Jesus was asked, what's the most important command in all the Bible, he responded with this statement that you should be familiar with, because we reference it fairly often here at Life Church, because it is the center of everything, as Jesus describes it. This is what he says in answer to the question. The most important commandment, answered Jesus, is this: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, with all of your strength. And the second is like it, is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. Jesus says in another place that all of the law and the prophets, everything that the Bible is teaching us, comes down to these two things. Everything has to run through this grid work, these two commands. Everything hangs on these. Love God, love one another. Everything comes down to this. This is what all of Christianity boils down to. And so today, I want to share that when we care for creation and our environment, we are expressing a deep love for God. You say, well, how is that? Well, let me ask you, have you ever created something that you were proud of and then entrusted it to someone else? Maybe this happened as a child, right? You made some artwork, you scribbled a little, snowman on a picture and a piece of, construction paper, and you gave it to mom and dad threw it in the trash, right? That's what they did, because they're wonderful parents. No, they didn't do that. They figured, oh my goodness, this is so amazing. You're like Picasso. We're going to put this on the fridge. We're going to put it on a frame. We're going to hang it on the wall. Like, that's what parents do, because when their children create something, the child is offering a part of themselves, their creation. And the parent endorses that. The parent loves that. The parent respects it and honors it. Right? It's an extension of the child. And when the parent takes good care of it, the child feels loved. Maybe you were entrusted with a family business. Maybe it got passed down to your parents or down to you. And to care for that family business, something a previous generation invested in and spent their lives in, and to care for that business is an expression of love and care to those who created the business. Maybe you wrote a song or a poem or created some other kind of art, and it's a friend of yours just is over the moon about it, just loves it so much. They post it on their Facebook page. They tell their friends about it. Oh, you have to hear this poem that they wrote. You have to listen to this song. This is so wonderful. And as they do that, you feel loved. Because when we create something and put it out there, it's a part of ourselves that we put into the world. And when others show respect for it, when they honor it, when they love on it, we feel loved. And I'm here to suggest that God is not that much different. We are in His image. Where does that come from us? God created this world and called it good, and called it good, and then 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 finished it up with it's very good, this creation. God was and is, I would suggest, intimately involved in His creation. And He invites us, people made in His image, to care for that creation too. Now, I could be going on out on a limb here, but when God said, let us make mankind in our image and our likeness, that He may rule over the fish and the sea and the birds in the sky and over the livestock and all the wild animals and over all the creatures that move along the ground, I'm going out on a limb, but I don't think He meant, and let mankind recklessly pillage and plunder the vast resources of this world and let them drive into extinction all of the fish and the sea and the birds and the livestock and the wild animals. I could be wrong. I don't think that's what He meant. God says this creation is very good. And He's entrusted it to us to steward and to care for it. Not just caring for the people, which is also very important, but also for the living creatures, the trees, the beetles, the ferns. Not like, Paul McCartney and the Beatles, but, the beetle, like regular beetles. Like the ferns, the lakes, the rivers, and the mountains too. And to love creation and to care for it is a primary way which we can express love for God, because He also loves the creation. All right, so that's the first thing reason to care for creation, is because when we do, we are expressing love for God. The second reason a brave new church will care for creation is because when we care for creation, we love others, which is the second half of the greatest commandment, right? Have you ever been to a national park? We have a few of these in our country, right? Pretty great places. Yosemite, Yellowstone, Acadia, Death Valley, the Badlands Glacier National Park, the Grand Canyon. I don't know if you've ever been to any of these, or maybe some other national park, or stood on the edge of the Grand Canyon, or stood on the granite coastlines of Acadia and looked out over this amazing natural setting. You might be surprised to know that you were actually being loved by people like John Muir and other conservationists who fought tooth and nail to preserve parts of our country so that the general populace could see and experience such unrivaled, majestic beauty, and that it wouldn't be just limited to the rich who could afford to build a house there and buy it, buy all that whole park. It was a conservationist who helped start the national park system in the late 1800s, which was something that was unheard of in the history of mankind. This was a new idea, this idea of starting national parks and preserving this kind of land for the common people, for the group, for all of us. These conservationists saw that some of these unbelievably beautiful and awe-inspiring natural landscapes were at risk of being destroyed by encroaching civilization. Places like Yosemite Valley were being timbered and dammed and used as grazing pastures for livestock and settled and spoiled. And these amazing locations around our country were viciously fought over and have been painstakingly preserved so that all people can enjoy them. Because nature and wild places are good for humans. You've heard me say this before. We talked about it a little bit before. I'm sure you're not surprised that I think this. We need them. So those who have helped preserve them have shown love to fellow humans like you and me as we pay that fee and we go into the national park and enjoy the setting. But another way that we can love one another when we care for creation is simply by realizing that we are all connected in this entire huge ecosystem. We are connected. You don't pull a string over here and nothing happens over here. This is a profound, profound truth and reality that I think we have a hard time grasping because the connection is not always very direct and immediate, right? If I throw garbage in the street, or if I run a business or a farm that pours pollutants into the rivers, my actions will have some effect on you and everyone else in our community. The problem is, again, that it's usually not a direct correlation. What you do today or I do today doesn't have an immediate impact often on myself or someone I know and care about or love. But over time, and the more people or corporations behave in the same way, the more negative repercussions of our actions come back to haunt us. But we're mature adults, right? We have fully formed prefrontal cortexes. Like, we can think into the future. We can think about delayed gratification, and we can think about long-term ramifications of things, right? We're able to do that as adults. Like, we can postulate that if I do the same thing repeatedly, if every day I just dump some acid into the river, I just take a wheelbarrow, don't worry, it's not going to hurt anything, right? Well, you know what? Like, I have a brain that processes, and that actually is going to hurt something. So this is how we can love our neighbors, right? Whether our neighbors be fish or wildlife or trees or your human neighbors next door or in the next town or across the globe. Because we're all connected. So when we care for this interconnected world that we live in, we're loving one another. But I want to push this a little bit further in this, that Jesus has called us to show love for the poor. As Christians, right? This is the poor, the marginalized, the needy, the ostracized, the outcast, those who are disenfranchised in one way. We have a unique calling as followers of Jesus to care for those people, for those who have, to help those who have not, all of that. And it is the poor and the disadvantaged who are paying the highest price when it comes to the collective ramifications of global climate crisis. When seawaters rise, it's the poor who are left homeless. When famines hit, it's the poor who are left standing in long lines without food because they can't afford the car to get out of there or the helicopter to take them somewhere else. When wildfires scorch communities or floodwaters destroy neighborhoods, everybody loses their home, but it is the poor who don't have the resources to rebuild their lives. Now, Dr. Katharine Hayhoe is a world-renowned atmospheric scientist and also a dedicated follower of Jesus. She's actively involved in educating people about the reality of climate change and is convinced that humans are causing this climate change. And she tells a story about her heart breaking when she attended the Paris Climate Conference. Because she saw firsthand, with all of these nations of people gathered together, nations all across the globe, she saw firsthand how the poorer and non-industrialized nations who have contributed the least towards global climate crises are the ones paying the highest price because of the effects of it. On their website, the Mercy Corps make this statement. They say, while everyone around the world feels the effects of climate change, the most vulnerable are people living in the world's poorest countries, who have limited financial resources to cope with disasters, as well as the world's 2.5 billion smallholder farmers, herders, and fisheries who depend on the climate and natural resources for food and income. You say, well, I'm doing good. I'm fine. I don't have any problems. Well, we just can't see them. Right? Sometimes proximity to the ramifications of our decisions can be really helpful. Actually, what can be really helpful if you're like, well, I can't go to Rwanda and find out how climate change is affecting you know what you should do? You should load up your car with some garbage. It can be clean. Just keep it in bags. But take it to the transfer station here in Lancaster yourself. And drive in and pay the $30 that you have to pay to go in and throw some stuff, and let that experience just marinate. Let the smell marinate. We were over there dumping something one day, and I was just like blown over by the smell and these just massive bulldozers, pushing these massive piles of garbage that they take out to Turkey Hill out there along the Susquehanna and just cover up, right? Bury it. It goes away. We don't see it anymore. Right? We got to do something, right? I'm not here with all kinds of answers. I'm just trying to raise some awareness, right? But maybe expose yourself to some of that, right? Because sometimes when we can see the ramifications of some of our actions and choices and decisions, when we actually are exposed to them, it can change our heart and our mind about things. Usually that's what it takes, right? Personal exposure, and then we go, oh. So what I'm trying to say to us today, to care for creation is to love the poor and the vulnerable, just like Jesus asked us to do. That's the point I was just trying to make. But the broader point for the whole morning is simply this, that a brave new church will care for creation. Because in doing so, we are loving God, we are loving our neighbors, and we are loving the least of these, just like Jesus asked us to do. So there's a lot of things you may think, oh, maybe this is overwhelming. I'm not sure. Maybe you disagree with me on a lot of this. We can talk about some of that in just a second. But, what can we do, right? And there's all kinds of stuff we can do. You can go to the transfer station on Harrisburg Pike in Lancaster and just take that in for a second, right? What really happens here? You can go out to Turkey Hill and look at the dump out there. You can just get outside and begin to enjoy it, because sometimes you're not really worried about something, again, until you see it. Like, till you go walk the Susquehanna and you see all the garbage that's everywhere strewn across the banks of the Susquehanna, you go, wow, that's kind of ugly. Maybe it's doing some reading, doing some researching. Maybe you want to begin doing more about recycling. Maybe you want to pay attention to your travel and your gas mileage. Maybe you want to consider getting an electric car or some sort of hybrid or solar panels on your home. All these things are good things to think about. And there are dozens of steps we can all take to show God's love for creation. But the one thing I want to encourage you to do today is sort of the crux of probably what is the most controversial part around this, especially in Christian world, but is to lean into the climate change conversation. Right? The climate change conversation. Now, I don't think I've ever spoken publicly about this here at Life Church before. It is a heated topic in our culture, but it's really only heated because it's become so politicized, which is so incredibly frustrating. When things become politicized, they just completely become like stalemate. But wherever you are on the political spectrum, I want to invite you to lean in and learn, right? Some of you might be like, I don't believe it. You're a false teacher. And some of you might be like, well, I'm all in. You aren't going hard, you aren't saying it hard enough, strong enough, Pastor. Like we got people, I'm sure there's people like on both sides of the equation here. But what I want to encourage us all to do in one way or another is to lean in to the conversation, right? With an open heart and an open mind. Some people say, well, scientists don't agree on this. And they'll say things like, well, for every one scientist that supports you, climate change stuff, I got a scientist that says we're fine. And that's that's something that happens a lot in our culture right now. Like, oh, it's just sort of just both sides kind of thing. Again, a lot of that's the political side. But on the science, on the climate change thing, it's not fully accurate because actually NASA looked into this and they determined that for every 3 scientists who say, humans are not affecting climate change, there are 97 who are convinced that it is. Scales are a little tipped, right? As far as the same people who figure out, how much weight your airplane should carry, when you fly across the country, the same people who figure out how to keep boats safe and who educated your doctors and when you go see them to deal with whatever. Those 97% of them are convinced through those same sort of like empirical tests of how we get to reality and understand reality and what is true. 97% of them say, we think this is a human-induced thing. 3% say no. So it's not really like a one-for-one correlation. So engage with that. Wrestle with that, especially if you're like thinking I'm crazy and I'm out to lunch. And I've become some sort of political leftist, some wacko tree hugger. I am a tree hugger. So anyway, there is that. Just ask my kids. So one of those scientists is Dr. Katharine Hayhoe, and I mentioned her earlier. She's a dedicated Christian and a scientist who studies climate change. She speaks and writes extensively from a Christian and scientific perspective about climate change. And I wanted to introduce you to her just briefly this morning, so take a quick look at what she has to say in this short video.
Hi, my name is Katharine Hayhoe, and I'm a climate scientist at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. A lot of people here where I live don't accept that humans are changing the climate. My husband and I are both evangelical Christians, and when we were first married, he couldn't understand why I'd support a myth made up by liberal tree huggers. By listening to him, I learned a lot about why people are hesitant to accept the science. And my husband learned how the data tells us that yes, humans are changing the climate. Now he's a pastor, and he's often asked, how could humans affect something as big as this entire planet? Isn't God in control? Of course I believe God is in control, but I also believe there are consequences to our choices. And clinging to old, dirty energy is no longer a good choice. Scientists measure how carbon dioxide is increasing in the atmosphere as we burn fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide traps heat, keeping it from going back out to space, instead warming the Earth. And climate change matters because it affects people. It's increasing heavy rainfall, heat waves, and the severity of hurricanes. Moving to clean energy to protect our climate is completely consistent with our values as Christians. Plus, investing in clean energy will give us cleaner air, conserve our water, and create jobs. Here in Texas, we already have over 30,000 jobs in wind and solar energy. And these new energy sources have revitalized the economies of many of our small towns. This is about protecting our way of life and not letting politics get in the way. Learn more about climate change and what you can do to help. Go to newclimatevoices.org.
One of the things she hints at in that is thinking about win-win situations, right? It's like, well, either the trees win or humans win. Either the rivers win or we win, or the spotted lanternfly or whatever, which is maybe a bad example. Because they may win. But in our economy and our world, searching for win-win situations, it doesn't have to be them or us. We're smart. We're humans. We have highly developed prefrontal cortex. We can think and we can process, and we can come up with win-win situations where it's good for our world, it's good for our natural world, and it's good for people. So one of my favorite movies, and I'll close with this, is The Lorax. Not just because Danny DeVito is the voice of the Lorax, or because of the Lorax's amazing mustache, which is really incredible. But the Lorax is this reflection on our propensity to destroy our very environment in a blind pursuit of progress and affluence, right? It's a story of someone who realizes that everyone needs a Thneed, this unique item made from the truffula trees. The Lorax shows up, this little mythical creature shows up and says, I am the Lorax, and I speak for the trees. And he cautions the Onceler about his destruction of the truffula trees. And as the demand for the Thneed grows, more and more the trees are cut down to harvest their resources, and eventually the last tree is cut down, just as the Lorax warned. And in the story, we're teased with this single word written on what appears to be a tombstone, right? Unless. It kind of lingers there in the background for a while. And by the end, we find out the full phrase that I think comes out of the words of the Onceler's mouth himself. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. Good old Dr. Seuss. Well, I think this is a very true message for the Christian. It's a message a brave new church can take seriously, should take seriously. Because a brave new church should care for creation. Because in doing so, we're loving God. We're loving one another. And we're caring for the poor and the needy, which is at the very heart of what Jesus asks us to do. So, think about these things this week as you learn to follow Jesus, together with us here at Life Church. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for these few minutes as we think about these things concerning creation and creation care and climate change. And I know it's a hotbed of political debate. So help us try to move out of the political pieces of all of this and think like Christians first. Think like people who love you, who love one another, and who are interested in the plight of the poor and the needy. And help us figure out the steps that we can each take. This is something that is a global project, a global concern. And may we not be the brake pedal in this conversation, but may we learn to figure out ways in which we can add to the gas pedal to help slow down the change and to learn to live within this world that you've created so unbelievably wonderful, amazing, beautiful, stunning world that you have gifted to us. Might we live in it in a way that doesn't destroy it for us and for future generations. Teach us the humility we need to walk this path. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. You are good, good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my song. You are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, you are good, good. Oh, gonna let me down. You're never 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 gonna let me down. You are good, good. Oh, 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 you're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. No, you're never gonna let me down.
Thank you for that. Hey, well, thanks for being here this morning. A little longer than normal. We have a lot going on our Sunday mornings lately. So thanks for hanging in there with us. Thanks for hanging in on outline. Let me try that again. Hanging in with us there online. Appreciate you out there. Appreciate you in the room. Remember, there's a lot of different things going on here. Get connected to the app. We got the youth thing happening. We got the volunteer thing happening, which if you've always been a volunteer at Life Church, we're still asking you to sign up and say you're coming to the thing on the 28th, if indeed you are coming. Anyway, and if you have anything you want to talk about concerning today's thoughts, message, happy I'll be hanging out here, or you can send me an email, the connection card. If you haven't done the connection card yet, you can take a minute to fill that out. So thanks again for being here. We look forward to being back next week. Be sure to be here. We're going to have a good time celebrating Mindy and her leadership journey here at the church and talking about how a brave new church empowers women. And so thanks for hanging out. Hope to see you next week. And until then, Godspeed.